Hello everyone and welcome to Quest 4 Overview. Today we're going to take a look at the two things that we did in Quest 4, one being web graphics and the other working with directories in our objective. Alright, let's jump right into it. First things first, we have an image. So I have this image over here we're going to go ahead and use for this particular lesson. We're going to jump into Photoshop, load it on up, and once we jump into Photoshop, there's three things that you need to do every single time that you're using Photoshop. First thing is making sure that you clicked on the right layer. Number two, going over to the tool that you need to utilize and then making some changes. So in this particular setup, we don't actually have an image open, so we can't get it started quite yet. But just to let you know, over on the left here, that is your tool panel. Now that can be dragged out and you can put it anywhere else that you might want on the screen. For this particular demo, I'm going to keep it docked over there. You will have a whole bunch of other little palettes floating around, but the one we want to take a look at is called Layers. And then right here in the middle, this is where we're going to be doing all of our work. This is where the image is going to pop up. I like to think of it as a canvas so that I can start working through all my lessons. So okay, we got Photoshop. This isn't going to be the in-depth, detailed version of what Photoshop is about. It's really just going to cover Save for Web for Photoshop. There's a lot of other things that we can look into in regard to making sure this design looks really great. We're not going to cover that here. We're going to cover the basics of taking a file in here and being able to export it out. So very first thing, you can just open a file right here in Photoshop. We did that in the first day, but in this particular instance, we want to create files that are exactly the size and pixel that we would want. So I am going to go to New, and I'm going to create a file that has a name of photo or maybe image. I'll just call it photo for now. It's really not a photo when you see it. But what we have here is our width. I'm going to set that to 250. Make sure you are on pixels. Your height is at 250 pixels. Your resolution for all the web work we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester and really in your life at this point is going to be 72 pixels per inch. Your color mode, want to keep that at RGB. For some reason that turned to 71.9. I'll put that back to 72. And then of course my background, you can elect to be transparent. You have a few other options, white or whatever the background color is set in your colors palette there. I'm going to keep it on transparent. It's good enough to get going. I'll go ahead and hit OK. So there we go. We got a 250 by 250 pixel canvas here that we can start working with. One other thing I like to do is I like to go up to my view here and turn on rulers. Then you can see that you have some rulers that are going to pop out here on the sides. Now if you right click in the rulers, you can change what kind of measurement that they're doing. So I'll change mine to pixels. Make sure this one is pixels as well. And then you can actually pull little guides out of those rulers to be able to line things up, position things on your canvas. Now one thing else you can do is you can click over here to this magnifying glass, and you'll notice at the top context menu that you can zoom in or zoom out. So I will do that now, zoom in a little bit. Now you'll also notice on this tab up here, it's going to give you how much of a percentage you're either zoomed into or if you're looking at that image at 100%. So we're looking at this at 300% at this stage. That's great. I'm going to go ahead and jump back on my tool. Remember again, you want to make sure you're on your first layer or whatever layer that you want to be. You want to make sure you're on the tool that you want to use, and then you can go ahead and make your edit. So this is going to be a cyclic process. You're going to do this over and over, always making sure you're in the right layer, making sure you're the right tool, doing your edit. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay, the very first thing that I want to do is I want to bring an image into this 250 pixel by 250 pixel canvas that we got set up here. So I'm going to go up to File, and then I'm going to click on Place. Now I already have an image. It's not quite a photo, but you'll get the point. And it's going to be sitting here on my desktop. So on my desktop, I got this thing called R2. And if you're familiar with the rage faces, there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and place that rage face right on my canvas. Now, the very first thing you're going to notice when you place something, it's going to have an X through it. And that's all right. So that's going to give you the ability to make some adjustments. Now I'm holding Shift on my canvas and grabbing one of the corners. Now that Shift does is it keeps my perspective. So if I were to let go of Shift and grab maybe one of these other corners, you're going to notice that you start squashing and distorting that image. Now that's called bastardization, and that's something we absolutely do not want to do when we have our imagery. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Escape to back out of those distortions that I did, and I'm going to redo that place by doing File, Place, selecting that same image, and placing it right directly into my canvas. Now holding Shift, I'm going to go ahead and readjust the size just a tad, center it up in the middle of my image, and hit enter. Now I've applied that transition to this particular instance. Okay, so what I can do now is I'm going to go down to my layers palette in the lower right here. I'm going to add another layer. Now you're going to notice that layer got added above the layer I just put in. What I want to do is I want to click, hold, and drag that layer right below that other layer. So that precedence matters. Now this one is on the top, and then there's a layer 2 that I just created underneath there. They actually call it layer 1 in this particular one. And I'm going to go ahead and just click on there, change the name to BG. It's going to indicate background. I'm going to go over to my palette over here, make sure I got the right color selected so I have white. That's great. And then I'm going to use this tool over here called the Paint Bucket tool. And all I'm going to do is drop some paint on there. Now I have a whole fully white background, and we have another image that's floating right on top of there. So one last thing that I did want to show you, I'm kind of rushing to do this right now because I want to get to saving these particular things in Photoshop, is I'm going to go to this Rage Face. I'm going to go ahead and pop it up here just a little bit further, and I'm going to click on that background layer. The reason I want to pick up on the background layer is I want to put some text on here. So I'm going to go over here, pick a color, so I pick black, and then I'm going to jump over to my T tool, and I can click right on this palette or this canvas, and I can start typing. So I'll put Rage Face. Now the very first thing you might notice is that it's a real small text, and that's fine. What we can do is we can highlight that text. You can go up to your text palette, give it a lot more of a font size. So that's a little bit too big at 72. Let's try 36. It's looking great. Alright, so I have a text layer that's floating around. I have my main top layer, and then I also have my background layer. We got a good image set up that we can go ahead and put in our site. So before we're ready to put everything in their site, make sure everything's positioned on that particular page, because we're going to flatten all these images and we're going to create one image export. So before we flatten the images, I want to make sure I have a backup of this file so that I can save it if I never need to come back to it. So I can do a save as. Right when I do the save as, it's going to give me the ability to save it in the Photoshop format. You'll notice up here it has a .psd as the extension. It has that photo that we had put in the beginning. So actually I'm going to rename it to Rage Face for this particular save, and then I'm going to go ahead and save it out right to my desktop. It's going to ask me if I want to maximize my compatibility, and I do. If you get this message, it's just saying that it can be backwards compatible in older versions of Photoshop. Go ahead and hit OK. And now I save this particular PSD. If I ever opened it up again, I'd have access to all these different layers. You'll notice there's a lot of little things that you can do within Photoshop. I'm just turning off the visibility of layers over in this layers palette. But what we really want to do is we want to save this so it's accessible on the web. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we're going to go to File, and we're going to go to Save for Web. Once you click on Save for Web, it's going to give you the Save for Web dialog, and you're going to have a lot of things that you can choose from. Now, the very first thing I'd want to point your attention to over in the right here is what format you might want to save it in. Now, we've talked about the formats. There's a GIF, and GIFs are really great if you have some transparency in the background, and you don't need it to kind of subtly fade up to another opaque or very solid color. So GIF is just having transparency and then a solid color, no gradient between there. JPEG has no transparency. It's really good for an image that has all the pixels within that square, and you wanted to save it and you can optimize it. We're going to save this one as a JPEG in just a second. I did want to point out the other one is a PNG 24. Now we can stay away from the PNG 8 for this particular lesson or any other lessons in the future. The PNG 24 allows you to have transparency. You can also have some gradient transitions within your particular image, and we'll work with that in class if you want to get a little bit fancy. But for this particular instance, we're just going to save as a JPEG. So by saving it as a JPEG, that's great, but you're going to notice in the Save for Web dialog that you have some options. First of all, it's going to give you an idea as to how long this might download based off a connection that you might have in your internet. So if you click on this connection, you can adjust the various speeds that you might want to test for. So if you're on a pretty quick speed, 2 megabytes per second, you can click it there. It's going to say approximately a second or under to download this image once you have it on a web page. So there's some things you can do. You can toggle this quality right here, and as you start toggling this quality, you can start taking a look at this optimized picture and saying, hey, is this going to pass if I take down the quality a little bit? You're going to save yourself a lot on the kilobit on the lower left there. What you can also do is you can bring 2 up and 4 up to do some comparisons. So I can click on this one, I can adjust the quality to maybe 50% or 55% and go around to the various ones and take a look at it pretty closely. And I'm going to look at it real close here, and you'll see some noise. I'm not sure how it's going to come through on this screen cap, but there's some noise on this one. Definitely 9 quality is pretty bad. Going on up to about 55. Not too much noise. I can see a little bit, but you know what? I think I'm going to go with the 55. So if I go back to my optimized here, it's going to be on that 55 because, again, I clicked on the 55 in the 4 up that I had here. That's the 55. So when I go back to optimize, I know what I'm going to be saving out as. Once I hit save, it's going to ask me where I want to save this. I'll go ahead again and save it to my desktop. And once I save, it's going to cram all those layers into one, and now you've exported a JPEG file. Now this original PSD file is going to stay alone. It's going to be by itself. You can always open that back up. You can make some adjustments, move text around, add blending effects, do all the fun stuff that we learned in class. Okay, for this lesson, we're done with the Photoshop aspect of it. Now what we have here is a rage face that we've saved out as a JPEG. We also have our PSD over here. If I go ahead and double click on that, you can see that rage face at 250 by 250 pixels. Okay, pretty easy stuff. So that's going to cover what we've done in Photoshop. Use Save for Web once you start using imagery in Photoshop and saving it out to be used in a website.